So I did actually see Belarus before Lukashenko. I was actually there for the 1994 elections. And this is an event that's part of an exciting new feature of ASN called Virtual ASN. And an edited recording will be available at the end on the Virtual ASN site, where videos of previous panels are also available. And the vASN team has together a great program for the entire academic year, and they will post it soon on the website in about a week. And people can go to either to the general ASN website or Google Virtual ASN directly for the updates. Today we've got a very fascinating panel, and I think it's a panel that focuses on internal events in Belarus rather than, let's say, the impact of outside countries, which we've heard quite a lot about recently. The people who are speaking today are focusing in their research directly on different aspects of Belarus. And I guess I've known two of them a little bit. I've known Hanna very well for quite a long time. So I'll introduce each in turn, and then we will get started. The first speaker will be Sofie Bedford, and she's an affiliated researcher at the Institute of Russian and Eurasian Studies at Uppsala University in Sweden. And her recent research is focused on the concept of opposition in post-Soviet authoritarian states, with Belarus as one of her main case studies. Our other two participants are both native Belarusians. Anton Dinerstein has recently received his PhD from UMass at Amherst, and his research is focused on public creativity, a process of collective cooperation that leads to the emergence and maintenance of new social and cultural spaces, as well as results in new forms of togetherness in modern-day Belarus. And lastly, Hanna Vasilevich is a lecturer at Europa-Universitat, Flensburg, Germany, and is board chair at the International Center for Ethnic and Linguistic Diversity Studies in Prague, and non-resident research fellow at the Department of Anthropology and Law, so the other way around, Law and Anthropology, at Max Planck Institute of Social Anthropology in Halle, Saale in Germany. And Hanna focuses on Belarusian national identity, linguistic policy, national and religious minorities, kin-state policy, minorities in borderland equality, and non-discrimination. So with that, I'm going to go straight to Sofie now for a presentation. The presenters will have about 12 minutes each, after which we will open it up for questions. And if you're asking questions, please use the Q&A rather than the chat, okay? We won't be looking in the chat for questions, we'll just be looking in the Q&A. So thank you. So Sofie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David. And I thought I would just also say that I'm very happy to be here, but I'm also very happy that we managed to organize this panel. And it kind of started as a discussion about maybe people don't know enough about the context. They see what's going on, but they don't really have the background. So the idea was that we will use our research to put these events in a larger context. And this is what I will do today. And I hope you can hear me because everybody froze in my screen. Can somebody just tell me if you can hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Good, excellent. So I will just jump right into it then. And I will start with the very obvious. And that is that it's not at all the first time that the election results in Belarus are falsified. And it's, of course, not the first time that there are protests against the election results. But I think you all realize that the movement that we see today is something kind of completely different than what we saw in 2006 and 2010. There were the other kind of main protests. That's when the main protest took place. And in my opinion, the main difference is that in previous post-election protests, the main driver was the opposition, the traditional opposition, the ones who were at that time the only ones to openly challenge the political system. And this time the opposition is taking the back seat, and instead many of the people, or maybe most of the people that we see on the street, are newcomers to political activism. And I think this is very important. And actually, I think it's even more important maybe that the people are on the street because they voted for Tikhanovskaya. And this is what I will focus on in my introduction. I will try to explain why I think this is so important and also why this development is so dangerous for the authoritarian system in Belarus. And I will start by claiming maybe that the authoritarian system in Belarus did not survive all these, 26 years because of the population being necessarily loyal to the authoritarian leaders. Instead, I think that it was a result of the authorities actually managing somehow to remove politics from the public life, or to be more specific, to make politics something that seemed uninteresting and irrelevant to a large part of society. And the bottom line of this is that if politics is not interesting, if politics doesn't matter, then changing the government also doesn't matter. And this means that the authoritarian system is safe. So how did they manage to do this? Well, first, by completely marginalizing the opposition. So the authorities have physical hegemony, and they could use this to exclude opposition completely from the political life. But they also have discursive hegemony, and it's equally, I think, as important. And this kind of contributed to establishing a very negative discourse about opposition, a negative perception of opposition as something very bad or something, they were only useless troublemakers and they had failed to accomplish anything, and so on and so forth. And I think this has resulted in a general feeling among the population at large that there's no alternative to the existing arrangement. So while people in general might not be huge fans of Lukashenko and his administration, they also did not trust the traditional opposition. So they rather stick with, well, the devil, you know, and all that. And then there's another important and interesting aspect of how politics disappeared in Belarus, and it's that the Belarusian authorities, as some people might dispute this and think it sounds strange, but I think they allowed a certain amount of controlled openness. And this means that people could still engage in some civic and cultural and business activities as long as they stayed away from the dirty field of politics. And this also contributed to making organized opposition seem like something very abstract and very unattractive to most people. And I think actually that Anton in his presentation will speak more about what kind of activities took place in these controlled open spaces. So then we have this situation where politics doesn't mean anything. And then that obviously means that election also does not mean anything. And this is how it was in Belarus. Election became seen as a game or a play where opposition was allowed to participate, like symbolically. They were allowed to play against the authorities because this was part of the democratic facade, but they were never allowed to win. And actually this phenomenon is really interestingly described in the academic literature as electoral authoritarianism, if you want to look closer at that. But something very kind of telling or interesting that comes out of this literature is that no matter how much the authoritarian leaders try to control the situation, all elections always bring a certain element of insecurity. And this could actually make these elections a tool for change. And this is exactly what we saw in Belarus. So when the leaders decided not to postpone this year's election, which they very easily could have done because of the pandemic, this was a huge mistake. They expected business as usual, but it turned out nothing as usual. So I think that what the authorities didn't realize was that the legitimacy of Lukashenko's regime was not what it used to be. And this, of course, is the topic of a whole other presentation that I don't have time to go into right now. But just to sum it up, that the trust in the government was low because the economic situation had been bad for a long time. And also there was a large part of the population that was looking for change, especially the younger ones. And they saw Lukashenko as old, representing something old. In any case, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit Belarus in the beginning of this year, This was seemingly the final nail in the coffin. People realized the authorities did not take the pandemic seriously. They did not care about their population in the sense that they tried to provide security for them. And the people had to look out for themselves. So this seemed to have made the regime lose a lot of legitimacy in many parts of the society. And at the same time, there was 3 new serious players entering the so-called election game. There was Tikhanovskaya, there was Babaryka, and Tsepkala. And they were not perceived as oppositional, and this is what kind of made them serious. So they were not perceived as oppositional in the conventional sense, but instead they were seen as real contenders, as some people who had credibility. And of course, this is a huge simplification, but we can say that the combination of these 2 aspects, the COVID crisis and this appearance of credible contenders, seem to have contributed to waking up the Belarusian people and make them care about politics again. And this all led to a very unusual election campaign where suddenly ordinary, non-oppositional people were openly sharing their wish for change in the country, both online but also offline in these huge election rallies that we all have seen the pictures of during this summer of protest in Belarus. And then this activity like amazingly translated also into activity on election day, where there were long lines to all the polling station and people actually went out and voted for Tikhanovskaya. Or it's probably more kind of more truthful maybe to say that they voted against Lukashenko, because I think it's come out from this protest movement that it's not really about Tikhanovskaya and making her president, but it's more about changing the system and getting rid of Lukashenko. But yet, it was Tikhanovskaya's campaign that kind of inspired people and made them go out and made them go to the polling station. But of course, it ended the way it always does in Belarusian elections. It ended with reports of massive fraud and with Lukashenko being declared a winner again. But what was different was that people did not react as they usually do. They didn't just shrug their shoulders and kind of move on with their lives, but instead they went out to the streets and tried to reclaim their votes. And as I mentioned 2006 and 2010, and this happened then also, but then it was the opposition, I would say, that called for protest against fraudulent elections. There was definitely fraudulent, there's no doubt about that. But I think the main kind of difference this time is that this time there was a clear winner, or at least a clear challenger, like an obvious challenger to Lukashenko. And I don't think there was in these previous elections. And why don't I think there was one? Well, because election was seen as something only the opposition kind of bothered with. People in general could not really care less. But this time they did care. And I truly believe this is why they are on the streets. This is why they participate in the strikes and other activities, because this time they know for a fact that their votes were actually stolen. So in some sort of conclusion, or to sum up, I believe that one of the most important reasons for the longevity or that the authoritarian regime could survive for this long is this resigned acceptance of its the Belarusian population. So most people in Belarus tended to see politics as somebody else's business, and then they just went on with their lives. But this is changing. And I don't really think that we should hope or even expect democratic quick fix. We shouldn't really expect change in Belarus happen overnight. But I do see that this explosion in political participation and civic activism that we have seen and we're still seeing, it's a really positive sign. And I think so because now ordinary people seem to have realized that politics is not bad, but it's important. And because of this, the political status quo has already changed, in my opinion. It's changed for the better. And because of this, I don't think it's even possible for Lukashenko to re-establish his hegemonic authoritarian regime in the shape and form that it used to be. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sofie. And that was a very well put together, I think, introduction to where we are today. If I could add a couple of very minor things, I was thinking perhaps one reason as well why he didn't postpone the election was because it was so easy in 2015. And for me, 2015 was the most passive kind of election in the whole history of Lukashenko's Belarus, where nothing went wrong for him at all. And I would also, maybe just add that this election is probably the first time, if you had free and fair conditions, that Lukashenko would not have won. I think probably in the other elections, he had a good chance of winning in pretty well all of them. I know in 2010, Andrei Sanikov and Neklaya both had strong campaigns, but I'm not sure that they were in a position to actually win. And this time was very different from that regard. But thanks again. That was a brilliant summation of where we are today. Okay, so now I would like to turn to Anton. And again, same thing. The floor is absolutely yours for the next 12 minutes.
Hello, everybody. 1 second, I'll just share my presentation. I have some slides. So 1 second. Eventually in my research, I tried to address this puzzle. How come these things like this collective creative practices, such as urban festivals, street performance, and different public lectures and other things can coexist with this dictatorship? And these practices have been proliferating in recent years, and I've been researching them for almost like 5 years already. And basically, I was interested in the following general questions in this research. How do Belarusians who are involved in these artistic and creative events understand these activities? And how does this involvement relate to different identities of Belarusians? And how do these understandings relate to specific larger social and historical context? And eventually, okay, we can see in this slide. So on the one level, I looked at the cultural discourse about identities, which I extracted from interviews with participants. And this analysis introduced some oppositional codes that exist in these discourses about culture and identity in Belarus, such as, for example, you can see here state and people, or different kinds of categories like old style officials or indifferent citizens. And this is, as one of my research participants told me, that Belarus is divided into 2 parallel Belaruses. So what does it mean that when I was talking, speaking with people, asking them about different kinds of activities that happen in public space, when they spoke about state organized events, they say, okay, these events are made by state for themselves. They don't care about people, and that's why we live into different cultures, 2 different countries. And then if we can see here, I just extracted these categories from this discourse. We can see that state in this discourse is not a unanimous entity. So there is kind of old style officials, Soviet style officials, and more European minded. And we can see such as, for example, Latushko, who shows that he is a different kind of person in the state apparatus, and he left it and this environment, and he shows that there are different people there. And then the people, actual people who been in this discourse, like Soviet thinking or indifferent or active citizens who actually created these events because they were not satisfied with what is offered to them by the state. And if we divide this by cultural groups, we can see there are at least 4 cultural groups in this discourse when people speak about these activities, like old style culture, where we can see all these Soviet thinking citizens, old style officials, and indifferent citizens. And this category, it doesn't mean they're indifferent. This is what Sofie mentioned, that people who are not interested in these current events, political events, who were taught not to be interested. And that's why they were caring about their kind of well-being. They didn't care about anything else until now. Now things changed. And then there is this kind of state counterculture and alternative cultures. One is mostly focused on Belarusian identity and language, and other is just active citizens who try to introduce something new into public space. And we can see some kind of snapshot of their relationship between each other on this slide. You can see that there is this old style culture with this Soviet kind of officials, Soviet style officials. They're not there is no exact dialogue between these alternative identities and them. And we can see this in this protest, how authorities cannot find a dialogue with people. And also, I would like to show you a few examples of public events that happened in Minsk in the summer of 2016 and 2017, to just give you an idea how these forms of public life are different from each other. So the first one, this is like state-organized event during the Independence Day parade. It was called the Tractor Ballet. And you can see here a lot of green and red flags, all this kind of state promoted national identity, official kind of national identity, and these tractors which try to relate to some traits of Belarusian identities, like this hats on the tractors, this countryside, peasant kind of culture. And when my participants talked about this event, they say, okay, this is something we don't want to attend. This is something that authorities organize for themselves, and we don't want to be a part of this. And it means that a large portion of population by now do not see themselves in this culture. And we can see this when we see the pro-authorities rallies on the streets and the protesters who are against these authorities, how they are different. And then this event, this was a part of Peshehodka Urban Festival, which actually I called a hybrid event, because there were spaces in Belarus when state culture and this alternative grassroots culture intersected on the spot. And sometimes it led to cooperation, sometimes it led to conflict. Right now we can see that there is much more conflict, but then still when these cultures intersect in the public space, something new still appears on public, because this grassroots culture kind of intersects with this old style culture and creates something new. We can see how people now assemble in yards and communicate with each other. This is similar trend. And also this is an example of a completely alternative culture, like independent grassroots festival, which is called the Brazil Street. And this festival happens in the old industrial area where there is no much regulation from authorities. At least there were no much regulation when I was observing these events. And this shows completely different atmosphere, this carnivalesque kind of, like Bakhtin mentions, kind of traits of carnival, where people freely wander around. They're more active. If we compare with the first event, with the parade, there is a passive audience. Here, everybody interacts with each other. There is kind of communication happening here. And people are directly involved in the co-creation of this collective creation of this public space, another way of togetherness, of being together. And this is a different culture. If we can see these parades which happens on marches that happen on Sundays, this is really similar to these carnivals that happened on the Brazil Street. Even the people with drums who go there, they're probably from here. It really reminds me this atmosphere, completely different from the state organized public space. And just to maybe to show you like a summary in a snapshot here. So here you can see how these events relate to different cultures. And why do we need actually to study this kind of carnivalesque kind of creative activities that happen in Belarus? Because these are really good visual examples of different cultures, how they show them in a public space. And if you can see that these alternative ways of cultural public life have been proliferating, and this is similar. And after COVID, it's activated even further because the authorities didn't show the population that they care about people, so the people had to resolve problems by themselves. And this is something that have been happening before for several years when they organized different art conventions, startup conventions, and other similar activities, because they didn't have what they need in everyday life. They didn't have these routines, and these alternative practices allowed people to create this alternative cultural and social life as opposed to this official state proposed life in Belarus, like everyday routines. And that's why probably we can see the traits of this in this current protest, that people learn how to self-organize, how to resolve everyday problems by themselves without state doing something for themselves, because they didn't care for some parts of people's life. And so, and this trait now is a really driving force of this protest, this self-organizing, collaborative part of this grassroots initiative that had been happening before. And that's why, just to sum up it briefly, so I would like to say that public creativity is not just about art or festivals, but rather it is a process of this everyday transformation of common social and cultural life. And this transformation involves conflicts, tensions, and oppositions. But without these oppositions and conflicts, this creative process cannot start, because what is driving this creativity is conflict with everyday reality. And that's why people involve in this. So this kind of existential element here, people see similar individuals to themselves, and they see that these people who are around them on these activities and these sports and these spaces see future in a similar way. And that's why it's kind of these trends and activities are something that is directed toward the future against this old style culture, which is really retrograde, which is really conservative. So, and then that's why we can see these oppositions reflected in these forms of public life. So I guess in general, this is all for now, just to summarize.
Okay, thank you. Took me by surprise there, Anton. I didn't think you were going to end right at that point. Thanks. That was very interesting stuff, and I think it explains to some extent the suddenness of the changes, which surprised many people, certainly in the West. Right? They all perceived Belarus as a fairly quiet place, unlike Ukraine, where you were unlikely to see these kind of mass protests, and yet everything suddenly seemed to be organized. And I wondered, I mean, we can't go over this now, but I kind of wondered, to what extent does generational change explain this? Because this is one of the things that's been put forward by some analysts as a reason why you see these changes now. I had a few reservations about that, in that, you didn't see it 5 years ago, and you probably, when you had certain protests that were taking place, for example, after the parasite laws were introduced, you suddenly got masses of people on the street, but they weren't young people necessarily. They were sort of working age and even sort of middle-aged people who came out. But certainly, I think you've given us an interesting picture of the cultural background to the changes. And I'm sure that will generate some questions in the question and answer period. So thank you very much for that. We'll go now to Hanna. And again, the same thing, the 12 minutes, and we will all hide ourselves while you speak. So the floor is yours, Hanna. And
thank you very much, David. I will share also with my presentation. My presentation tackles upon actually the current, just a second. Using the computer. Just a sec. Okay, I will try to handle the presentation, and we'll try to explain. So what I'm trying to do with my presentation, actually, I was interested to look at the protest and to see what people were actually showing during the protest. And myself being a Belarusian, I was very much impressed with the creativity of Belarusians during the protest. I was very much impressed with the elements of Belarusian identity that was distributed and that was presented, and in a certain extent, those elements and those creativity actually supported my the conclusion that I come up with in my PhD dissertation that I defended it 5 years ago, and therefore I would like to share it today with you with my conclusions, and to prove them with some pictures, and to sort of throw some of the ideas that I have into the ear, so we can maybe more discuss it. And but at the same time, I realized that Sofie introduced us into the political situation of Belarus and the history of Belarusian protests that happened before. Anton introduced us into the cultural life of Belarus and the creativity of Belarusians. But at the same time, we spoke quite little about the protests themselves. And I think it is also important to know to have some to have some numbers to know what's actually how many people were there and what actually happened. So basically, during the first 4 days, those protests were very brutal. We faced brutality during the previous protests, but they were not at that extent that was during those ones in 2020. First of all, we were impressed with the numbers of people that actually went to protest. Protests were peaceful, and I think that this is what we need to keep underlying, because despite the police brutality, Belarusians didn't respond with the brutality towards police, even after what Belarusians learned would happen in prison. That was fascinating, also for me as a Belarusian, to know that people didn't go and to take the justice into their hands, knowing that in in our reality, Belarusian judicial system would not bring those people would not bring any responsibility and will not question those people, but still people are not hostile and they continue going out. So during the first 4 days, over 6,000 people were detained, and this is official numbers. Over 1,000 claims of inhuman treatment and brutalities, including sexual assaults, were submitted to the courts, but yet none of those cases were investigated, and this is horrifying actually. But still, people continue going out, and what is also striking about those protests that it's continuous since the 9th of August daily, and over a weekend, every Sunday, people continuously go out and they protest, and those are massive protests. They count from over 100,000 people gathered together. And I think those numbers are also important to know, because this is something new for Belarusian society. We haven't faced this before, and this is also quite interesting to see when I will be talking about the elements of Belarusian identity that I noticed and I would like to underline. It's also important to know how many people, and also what is also important that the protests are also not taking place not only in Minsk, in the capital, but also in the regional center, in the smaller cities. Basically, protests are taking place all over Belarus, and so far all over in more than 15 cities, which is fascinating and important. So basically, what is also what I try to sort of summarize about the protest 2020 from the perspective of the identity is that it's the opposition versus state division is shifting, and now it's more like regime versus opposition versus society, and it actually refers to what Sofie was talking about. So now it's not opposition as a traditional classical opposition that we're referring to. We didn't have Tikhanovskaya going out. She actually during the first days, she actually asked people not to go out, but people still decided to go and to ask or to claim their votes back and to have the fair and justice elections. And therefore, we cannot really talk about the opposition in classical terms. And it's also what I would like to refer is that during those elections, people were referred to the fact that Lukashenko is only 3%. I'm not going to discuss all of these numbers, 97, 3%, but what is important, I'm not going to discuss if those numbers are realistic, but what is important that people come with this unifying number, that 97, they see them as a part of something which is nearly 100. They do realize that there are some minor part that's of people that are different, but unification is there, and it was during this pre-electoral and electoral campaign. And here I would like to refer to the book of Nelly Bekos, who was in her publication saying that there is an alternative identity, and that she was referring to this identity, the Belarusian speakers, those who do not have the Soviet past and they are more independent, etc., etc. But here, with what's happening during those protests, I would say that now we have this reversed alternative identity, because nowadays what she was referring as an alternative now became a dominant one. And I would say that the protests that we are having nowadays, it's sort of crystallized the unification and show that Belarusians actually have the national identity, that they have a strong national identity, and they managed to present the national identity during the protest. So basically, I will not be able to tackle all the elements, but I selected some of the ones that I found the most important ones, and I will start with the national symbols. For example, the white-red flag and the sort of the battle against the official red-green one. Previously, during the protest, I have to remind that the white-red-white flag was the official flag for the short period of time when Belarus became an independent after the collapse of the Soviet Union, with Lukashenko coming into power with the referendum. It was replaced with the red-green flag, which is the sort of main replica of the Soviet one. But usually after the referendum and after the change, white flag was usually referred as the flag of the opposition. And it was usually the one that belonged to the classical traditional opposition. And all of a sudden, during those protests, not having this opposition as a part of the protest, we have this white flag as a symbol of democratic, or the need for democracy, the need for reforms, the need for the change of the people. And so you can see the very much creative approach of the people, how they use it. You see the brides using the bright dress. You see the slogan, the long live Belarus, you see when the flags were taken from the buildings, people started to be very innovative. They started to use elements of their clothes. They started here on the picture with the guy. It says that alcoholics are with the people. To have the reference why alcoholics, it's when Lukashenko tried to disgrade the protesters, he started to call them rats. He started to call them alcoholics, drug users, people without a permanent job, etc., etc. And people tried to use his the derogative definitions to show, okay, you call us prostitutes, we are here, we prostitutes are here, alcoholics are with people, and alcoholics here, and it's the white wine, the red wine, and the white wine, they are also referring to the flag. Basically, you can see that it's a massive one. And the next picture, I would like to show you the white flag that became not only a symbol, but it's something like people are extending. It's like a message during the Sunday's protest. And if we could see the official flag that we still have in Belarus is being used, it becomes a symbol of autozaks, those machines where the automobiles that are taking the detained people to the prison. You see the riot police wearing these flags, and helicopters when Lukashenko tries to sort of regain his presumed popularity that is not there anymore. What is also quite interesting that during the first week, it was quite interesting to see that people also tried to show that they were not trying to divide the people, the Belarusians into groups, but they were trying unifying together. And firstly, during the first week, we saw the pictures of a couple. So one would be wearing or holding the white red white flag, another one be with the red green flag, and they will be kissing or they will be holding hands together, showing the unification of Belarus. They wanted to show that we Belarusians are together. But when this flag started to be so promoted by the riot police, by those aggressive forces, after that, these flags totally disappeared from the protesters' side. This picture is also quite interesting to see both sides. Here, I would like to say that it refers first to the white, red, white flag, and also to the language. And I would say that those protests show the bilingualism of Belarusians. Belarusian language for many, many years was under repression and suppression from the governmental side, but now we could also see that the slogans are bilingual. People are using more Belarusian language in the protest, having the support from the surroundings and from the other protesters. And also you could see that this visualization is also quite often choose to use Belarusian language. And those pictures that you can see here are actually the pictures or the symbols, coat of arms of the various districts, for example, of Minsk, or the of Vitebsk, for example, and the only one that you see at the bottom is the part of Drazdy, and this is the area where Lukashenko and his supportedly this elite, Lukashenko's elite, living together, and you can see this. Okay, David, I understand that I have to wrap up. So basically, using the official language. The last thing that I think is also important is religion. And religion is also something quite interesting that we haven't seen before during the protest, is that firstly, we have traditionally a Russian Orthodox Church supporting Lukashenko. But this time we see that many religious determination first condemned violence and repression. Orthodox Church had to replace the Metropolitan Pavel because of his condemnation of the violence. Also on the next, on the my right hand side, you could see the person, the Orthodox priest from Homel, who holds the slogan "Stop the Violence," and also you can see the Archbishop of the head of the Orthodox Church of Rodno and Volkovysk, who is during the mass also was referring to the fact that he condemned the riot police activities and brutality and violence against the protesters, and it's quite untypical for the Russian Orthodox Church. But what is also quite interesting that the Muslim community, representatives of both the heads of the both Muslim groups also expressed their condemnation of the violence, and the head of the Catholic Church was very active in condemning, and as a result he is currently not allowed to Belarus because officially his Belarusian passport is not valid, and he's not able to get from Poland to Belarus. And very shortly, but it's very clear, the women's role, which is very important, but we can discuss it during either the Q&A session, should we have time and interest. And to have a very, very, very short sort of conclusion, what I would like to say, that those protests revealed unification of the Belarusian society. It showed formed identity where Belarusian is not only present, but also expanded its use. And we have the widely accepted symbols and slogans despite the 2 decades of the oppression by the Soviet regime. And I would honestly say that we have a clear cut from the Soviet past. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'll just wait for you to take the slides off the screen. There we go. Perfect. Okay, thanks very much, Hanna. And you covered a lot of ground there, and I know that some of it you had to kind of skim over, which was unfortunate, but it would probably come up in the question and answer period. And regarding the flags, I'll just make a couple of quick comments. I mean, Lukashenko was first inaugurated under the white, red, white flag, and their pictures have been circulating in recent days about that 1994 inauguration. And yet, I would also point out that, in Tsikhanovskaya's early campaigning, you could actually see both flags. You never saw an EU flag, you never saw a Russian flag, but you saw the white, red, white, and also a few green and red ones as well. And obviously metamorphosized into a complete lack of red and green flags in the later stages and in more recent protests, which is interesting. I hope we will have time to talk about the three women's campaign and the role of women generally in this protests in Belarus. But I see that we've now got, well, 17 questions unanswered so far. So that's a lot. And I got a couple of questions for Anton for sure. I will simply to go through these questions. I think we've got enough time to do it. And I will ask that we keep the answers fairly succinct so that we can get through most of the questions. And I looked through them briefly and they all seem to be pretty good questions. So the first question is from Zina Gimpelevich. Zina, hi, fellow Canadian here. And Svetlana Alexievich continues to appeal to the Russian intelligentsia for support. In fact, Irina Prokhorova and her team do lead a rather strong to the Belarusian people cause. Please comment. So who would like to comment on that question? Or rather, it is a comment, so you have to comment if you're going to comment. Anyone? If not, don't shy away from the question.
I mean, I don't feel like I'm an expert in this, but I mean, when I've been following this, it's not. I always keep saying that for me, Tikhanovskaya doesn't seem to, in her campaign, she is neither taking like a pro or against Russia stand. Mm-hmm. So it seems to me that it could make sense definitely to appeal to the Russian intelligentsia, because I understand that there is not being from there, but I still kind of get the feeling that there is certainly this feeling of brotherhood between the Belarusian and Russian people. That's no doubt about that. So, I mean, I'm not sure what it would lead to, but it's I can't see that it's a bad idea. I mean, if you get the support of the Russian intelligentsia, that could only be supporting the cause. In my, just to say something about it.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually, that reminds me. I don't know what happened to Svetlana. Is she still in her apartment with the Swedish Chargé d'Affaires?
I've not heard anything now for, it was about a week ago where the European diplomats were sort of staying in her apartment. She's certainly not been arrested though, because I certainly think we would hear about that. Okay, I have a couple of questions for Anton, and one of the questions for Anton is also directed to Hanna. So I'll start with the first one, Anton, which is directly to you from Elisa Frankel. Thank you. Those people who are taking part in the old or state events, what is their motivation and how do they position themselves in the political situation? Do you have any comment on that? You'll have to unmute yourself, Anton.
Sorry. So if I understand it correctly, it's about the motivation of people who go to the state-organized events, right?
I think so. Yes.
So it's not a really easy question, but the thing is that people who go there, they are divided by those who have to go there because they have been asked to by the state authorities. This is one part of them who not necessarily want to go there. And there is another part of the people who actually believe in these cultural values, in this cultural world that all style event represent. So people who go to these parades, I would say, like, really roughly, there is a part who obliged to go there, but because they serve in state-related institutions, for example, like teachers or officials or somebody else who just get these notifications, okay, you must go there on holidays or somewhere. But some of them, they actually are really actively supporting this position. They believe that these values are true and good values, and they have a right to have this position because these cultures, these all are parts of Belarusian society. So, but mostly the people who don't go there are those who don't share the values of the state-organized events. So I guess this is the motivation. Basically, some of them are obliged to go, some of them are really back in this culture. And I cannot tell about the actual amount of people, the percentage, because I didn't have this analysis, but there is a portion of population who participates there for different reasons. Oh, David, you are muted.
So we can tell each other, right? A question from Viola Ginger. I hope I pronounced that right. My apologies if I didn't. And it's for Anton, but later she said it's also relevant to what Hanna was saying. The Belarusian opposition has worked extensively since before I lived there in 1997 to 99 on reinforcing Belarusian culture and identity through the arts. How much did that contribute to the current identification, cultural awareness, confidence of the public to mobilize during this time? So you want to start, Anton, and then I'll bring in Hanna.
Okay, so this is a question. So in 90s, oh, sorry, something happened with my screen. Just a second. So in the 90s, the opposition, so if we talk about the opposition, this was a position which were mostly focused on this Belarusian language identity and this white, red, white flag and the current alternative coat of arms, which is not treated by authorities as an official symbol. And then there is still some parts of this, like, for example, we have such initiatives as Art Sediba, for example, or Symbol By, who use these symbols, like national symbols, to promote the identity. And then this was also one of the groups which I had in my charts, which was kind of active Belarusian speaking culture, who are mostly focused on this Belarusian concept, which a Belarusian language was primary value for them, and then all these symbols. And I can see how this trend have survived for some part of population, but then there was a different trend that something which didn't relate exactly to national identity or these traditional symbols, which was just active citizen culture who wanted to introduce new ways of living, of being together, and it not necessarily related to Belarusian language or to national symbols. It's only now in this protest we can see how the symbols attain different meanings for people. So those who never used a Belarusian language or white and red, white flag, now they use them not because of the probably national identity, but firstly because of this, that they represent different alternative values to this old style culture. But then, and secondly, it's also a part of national identity. I would say probably this is how I could respond briefly. There is much more to this, definitely, but short of time, I guess.
Yeah, Hanna, do you want to comment too? Unmute. Don't forget to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I have a little bit different stance that Anton has. For me, actually, though the process that we are having now, and I understand that he refers to the to his research, but based on my research that I had before for my dissertation, and also based on the process that we are having now, I would say that the that was the grounds that we are using nowadays. And once talking about the national identity, and once talking about Belarusian language in particular, one shouldn't forget that Belarusian language was repressed and persecuted, and people speaking Belarusian language were persecuted, especially at the end of 1990s and the beginning of 2000s. And it takes once having something and which was not that allowed, and it took people quite some time to come to the possibility to use it publicly and to use it freely. And I see that nowadays more young people opt to use Belarusian language in their daily life. More people, young families, choose Belarusian language as their daily communication language, and they started fighting for the rights to bring their people, their children. They're fighting against the regime and the system to have the possibility of their children to go to the kindergartens, to have their children to go to the schools, to have their children to be taught in Belarusian language. And therefore, what we have during the protest, especially the flag, especially this bilingualism that we are facing now, and I see that as the sort of results what we had in 1990s, and slowly it comes to the results. So for me, it's not something, it's not detached. It doesn't have different meaning. For me, it's the same, but maybe it has more meaning, but not different. Maybe we brought something additional to that, but different, definitely not something different. So to be very short about it.
Okay, thank you very much. It's certainly a fascinating thing to, to go to Belarus, and sometimes you hear the different languages. And I remember being with Veronika Laputska in a cafeteria in the middle of Minsk, and she asked for something in Belarusian, and the waiter replied in Russian, and they had a conversation like this that went on for about 10 minutes. But they were mutually understandable, and that's really, I think, part of the issue. Okay, we'll go to the question by Doug Cameron. Why do you think police and military are still supporting the current regime? Anybody like to have a go? Hanna wants to go at that one too, okay? And anyone who wants to answer is welcome to join in.
Yeah, my position with this situation. So basically, we need to understand that police and military are very much linked to Lukashenko because of the several issues. First of all, when Lukashenko came into power, he made sure that those people become very loyal to him. We need to remember that when Lukashenko came into power, he was not supposed to be a leader for very long. He was used by the young politician at that time just to be a face for a certain time. But he was clever enough to realize it, and he had the support, and the support was particularly made of the police and of the militia. And then for years, he made these people around him to become his supporters. But how to make it? He linked them with the, I don't want to come with the conspiracy or something, but what is clear that it's money-related issues. Those people were always better paid than the rest of the society. Nowadays, we also have the issue of these repayments, those loans that certain institutions are generously given to people to build the flats, to get to house, etc., etc. And many people, especially during the protest, we see nowadays with the proofs during the telegrams and Instagrams and during the direct communication, then some people would like to leave because they feel very uncomfortable with what's happening with their profession and with their prestige and renommee, but they are linked to those institutions, and they cannot really leave them because they're linked with these financial obligations. And so many initiatives that we're facing now they are offering them some financial help, but obviously there is no possibility to help all of them to get off the hook. And this is one thing. The other thing that I think is important to keep in mind, that those people supported this regime for many years, and it's not that easy to say, okay, for 20 years I supported the regime and now I resign. And then to do what? There will not be, some of them are already too old to find another job. They are not qualified to get another education, to get another profession. They are not competent enough, to get into the job market. And for some, we can also say that maybe they've done something that the retribution they may face. And staying with Lukashenko is definitely their security. They are guaranteed that nothing's going to happen. Therefore, they would support him till the last drop of blood.
And I guess once you, sorry, go
ahead.
Did you speak, Sofie? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was listening. I was at another event recently, and somebody talked about worldviews, and I think that could also be. It's interesting because Hanna mentioned that some people are old, they can't get another job, but a lot of these videos that you see with these thugs that kind of attacking the protesters, supporting Lukashenko, trying to keep him in power, they're very young, and they look like the Titushkas or something like that from like you used to see in Ukraine. And then I wonder if it's this thing with the worldview that if you're so set in your ways that this is the only way, Lukashenko is the only, I can only imagine this kind of system, that this is the answer. But I don't know, it's very difficult to say, but it's hard to imagine otherwise why these young guys would be supporting him. I can't imagine that much money in being a thug.
Both Hanna and Anton want to respond very briefly because we've got a lot of questions I'd like to get through, okay? So Anton, you go first since you've not said anything for a while, and then I'll turn to Hanna.
I just have a brief addition to what was said. So there is another thing that from what I see here and here while participating in all these activities in Belarus here, it becomes also clear that some of these police, they really believe that they do something right. They really believe that this is the right way that things should be in Belarus. And this is something, I'm not sure how people can deal with this, but this is probably a result of this ideological work which they have while they're being prepared for become like officers or police to do their duty. So this is another also a cultural aspect of this, like beliefs in that this is a right, and this is a problem. Yeah, I think here.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And Hanna, quick comment.
Yeah, I totally agree with Anton. And just to add regarding the young people, first of all, we need to remember Belarusian system of education. Those who are getting free education have to repay the government for that. Some are getting loans. And as I mentioned to Sofie, you would be surprised that these young riot police are very well paid. And those numbers, if you can compare like €5,000 or $5,000, this is unbelievable amounts for Belarusians. And the promise to get the flats, especially for those who are not from the capital but for the region, is a very good motivation to believe in whatever you are told and to be very brutal on the street, just to be very short.
Okay, thanks. So we're going to move on. The next question is from a Ukrainian perspective, Marta Bohachevsky-Homyak. And she says that the presentations reminded me of an overlooked manner of Ukrainian establishment of independence, and that was the popularity of the time of rock and music festivals. Of course, in Ukraine, the national narrative began to play a dominant role very early. How are the Belarusians handling the potential bifurcation on linguistic and political issues? Is there any active discussion of Slavic unity as defined by the Russians? And don't all jump at once into this one. Yeah, you can start again, Hanna.
Again, I'm in my presentation here, I will be referring mostly to the protests. And during the protest, there was something that I didn't mention in my presentation because of this shortage of time, but what was quite interesting that Belarusians during the protest didn't make any geopolitical choice. They didn't opt for either European Union or for Russia. Russia appeared only as the concern should Putin start a military intervention. And that was the only way that Belarusians didn't want to, first of all, Belarusians didn't want it to be compared to Ukraine, Russia, or whatever any other nations. And whenever someone would bring the comparison to Ukraine, immediately Belarusians would say, no, please do not compare, we're totally different. And full stop. Russians were never brought during the process to any, there was no hostility against Russian as the nation, which is also quite surprisingly, but only as a Putin as the leader of the regime and only from the perspective of potential military intervention. A part of that, when that was sort of slowed down or became not that acute, it immediately disappeared. As coming from the perspective of potential development of political relations or diplomatic relations, Belarusians are in favor of both good relations with the European Union as well as with Russia, especially continuing good economic relations with the Russian.
Thank you. And that actually allows me to bring in a question that was sent privately to me during this discussion from Julie George. And she asked that we might make a comparison with Armenia's Velvet Revolution. And it appeared in Al Jazeera, and I have the link if anybody needs it. Is there a possibility, for example, then of an Armenian type solution to this, where you manage to get rid of the leader, but you don't break relations with Russia at the same time? And it seems to me Armenia is relevant in some ways. It's not part of the Slavic family, but nevertheless, it certainly broke away from the European Eastern Partnership and has much closer relations, cordial relations, I would even say, with Russia today. Is that possible in these circumstances?
Okay,
So
I'll start.
You're the only one with
No,
the
but
mic.
I've also exactly, yeah, grab the moment. Also because I'm kind of Caucasus is close to my heart. No, but I mean, I was surprised in the beginning that people were not comparing this more with the Armenian case, because I think there's a lot of similarities, because everybody said Armenia will never, they could never do anything because Russia would not allow it. There's Russian troops on their territory, so on, but still they did allow it. But of course, I've been informed afterwards, there's a lot of other things that differ between these cases. But as I said before, I don't see that. So there's never been, as Hanna also just recently also pointed out, there's never been like a choosing between Russia or Eurasia, or Russia and European Union in this. So I think it's a very plausible scenario, because it doesn't matter in one way. Of course, there might be a symbolic thing for Putin letting someone come to power after revolution, but if you think about it, it doesn't really matter if there's a new president in Belarus, because Belarus will be as dependent of Russia even after they have a new president, right? So most of their economy is dependent on Belarus. There's really still going to be very close relations. I don't see why not, if you may say it like that. But of course, it's whether it's too symbolically challenged, like to show that a leader will come to power after a revolution, and then people will expect the same thing in Russia. But the conditions, I think, like are there for Russia to still be very influential, no matter who's going to be in power. But that's a whole other, of course, that leads into a whole other discussion.
Okay, yeah, and it actually leads into two questions that for Jessica Mayazon, my apologies, I'm not leaving your question out, but the next two questions are very relevant to what was just said, and then I'll go back to your question. But the question from A. Satinaholm and Jonathan Parker are both in similar vein. The first is, how do you see Putin's action and potential coming actions in Belarus? How will that strengthen Lukashenko and the authoritarian regime and prevent the possibility of democratic processes? And then Jonathan Parker says, well, one way or another, Lukashenko will leave power eventually, whether he's removed or dies in office. Incidentally, I'm not sure I would wait for him to die in office, but still. What are some likely post-Lukashenko scenarios for Belarus? So two questions, really. How could Putin strengthen him, and what might happen after he's gone? Does anybody want to attempt to answer those questions?
I guess I could say something. So it depends on how things will turn out, because now there are a lot of talks about this constitutional reform, and constitutional reform without people agreeing on that. But if this will happen, it doesn't mean that it will be a democratic government. And then in this case, this can be a very much similar situation. It just will be different centers of power or gravity in the state apparatus. But then if constitutional reform doesn't happen as it planned by the authorities, and something else happens, for example, Lukashenko leaves and gives the power to somebody else who makes this free elections, and then people elect a different president, then I guess it will be really like pragmatic and practical relationship with everyone, because the people who are now trying to who have been the candidates for the presidency, they never said that they want to be there against somebody. They were saying, okay, we want to be friends with everyone because we want to have good economy. And then if you want to have good economy, you don't need to try to not to work with any country. So you need to work with everybody if it's beneficial for the Belarusian country. So, and I guess if this happens, then probably things with Russia will not change much. It will be just more practical, more business driven, not just politically like they are now. There are some political things that interfere with relations with Russia, and same with European Union. And then if somebody who is more pragmatic, less choosing sides will be the president of Belarus, then probably it will be more diverse. So I guess this is some of the thing I can say on this issue.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move along because we have 18 questions and we've got 6 minutes left. So I think it's an impossibility, but nevertheless, we will work our way down. Jessica Mayazon, comments that it seems that local journalists and bloggers are focusing on images of women participating in the protests. Why do you think women activism participation is so strong? And why do you think there's a focus on this imagery narrative? So it fits into culture. We have two women on the panel. Hanna wants to start, so why don't you go ahead? Unmute.
Yeah, thank you. I opted to answer this question because it was actually part of my presentation that I didn't have time for. I find the female participation in the protest quite a striking and important element of Belarusian identity, and so that's something that's very often is underestimated or overlooked, because the role of a woman in Belarusian identity is quite important. And as we can see, first, what is important is that Tikhanovskaya became a candidate just because Lukashenko totally underestimated her as the candidate, and that was his saying that I don't remember the exact citation, but it was something that the state can be led only by a strong man, and a woman cannot do that. And that was just simply like that Tikhanovskaya was led and allowed to participate in the election. And then we see that Tsepkalo calculated the situation very well, and he sent, instead of joining himself as a part of the team, he sent his wife, who was also not anyhow politician. And Maria Kolesnikova was actually the only person who was politically educated and knew how this machine is working. Then after Tikhanovskaya and Tsepkalo, they fled the country, but Maria Kolesnikova stayed, and even though she was not the one who called for the participation in the opposition, but she became sort of a symbol at a certain point. As you can see, those Soviet-style Masha, the country calls for you or something, when she became sort of a symbol. Remember Nina Baginskaya, the old lady who is over 70, who is the oldest participant in opposition in those opposition rallies from 80s and the end of 80s, whose debt in front of the government is over $10,000 as a fine for participation in the protest. Remember the female solidarity chains, when female women realized that men were significantly brutally beaten in the prison, and they decided, okay, we protect our men, we take it on us, and we will go and show that we are mothers, we are sisters, we are daughters, and we hope that we will not be beaten, but we are ready for that. And they were staying in white as a color of purity, with the flowers in front of the guy who are just military dressed, this brutal man, and saying, guys, please, we just bring peace. And this become a symbol. And I think this is important. And the role in the protest, that women became the ones who managed to fight against, not bringing the physical forces, but managed to drag the young man from riot police and to protect them. That's also important. And it was also quite interesting. There was one quite interesting story when the riot police released one young man, and the journalist asked her, how did you manage to do that? And she said, I was yelling at him as I would yell at my father-in-law, who is an abuser. And I was using the very swear language, really bad language, but this is how you have to talk to the abuser. And she was using the psychological tricks because she saw him as an abuser. And it's also quite interesting that it's currently used in politics. So this is like what we see. It's not only politics, but it's also psychology and family relations. And the state nowadays is facing or playing the role as an abusive father or something.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to debate now how to extricate myself from this predicament that we have about 17 questions. There are a couple of questions about Lukashenko's secret inauguration and whether it's a sign of naivety or whether, in fact, well, some think it's a sign of him implicitly admitting that he lost in his confrontation with the Belarusian people, the fact that he had to do this in secret. It's a strange thing to do. You know, I don't recall this happening in previous elections. It was always a major demonstration. And I just wonder if anyone felt like commenting on why he chose to do it this way, whether it was, you know, a recognition of the fact that he is no longer popular. I mean, maybe not 3%, but certainly probably no more than 10% of the population is backing him at the present time. In about 2 minutes, could anybody attempt to answer that one? It comes from Julia Brell, and I think there are a couple of others who asked the same question. Sofie, yeah?
Okay, I take 20 seconds. And I think, yes, of course, you're right. I think it's obvious. I mean, even he, it's never gone on for over a month before. So any protest that he has faced, he has managed to squash in, I guess the longest one was 2006, and it took like 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's, yeah, I think definitely he's doing it secretly, and he's hoping that he's doing this and it's going to go back somehow. They're going to go back to normal after a while. And then he's already president.
Okay. And there was a related question on whether this could still continue peacefully, whether peaceful demonstrations in Minsk and other cities are going to bring change. Can you do it that way? Or are other elements necessary? And does it have to turn into a more violent confrontation? You know, at what point do you have to abandon this peaceful process that's taken place so far and actually impress the whole world that it is taking place so peacefully, in contrast to what we've seen elsewhere? Is it possible to change in this way? Anton, would you like a quick response?
Try to. It's a different, actually difficult question, but as I see this, so this is a similar trend, like culture which is changing, and I have seen this through my data, through these activities. It was evolving rather slowly, but it was obvious when you can see it and compare it through time. And then after the COVID, it became faster. But now still we can see that such changes, if they are done peacefully, they not happen fast, they're not quick. But we can see that some things are changing here and there. Small different steps are taken. I don't know how long it could take. But if it will continue to be a peaceful protest, it probably will take time to do some change.
Right. If I could just make a few closing sort of comments. You know, I would say that Belarus has changed irrevocably. We will never again see the Belarus of 2010 or 2005. And even though the process will take time, I completely agree with Anton on that one. I think the changes have been so fundamental that there's no real going back for Lukashenko as the president. You know, he's never going to recreate that bond he had with the population that he did have at one time. I mean, really seriously, I think there were bonds between Lukashenko and the population, and that's now gone. I would like to close by, well, first of all, I'm sorry to those Q&A people who asked these questions. We've got them, and we may still answer them through private email or other means. I think we're happy to answer questions. All 5 of us would be prepared to respond. And we've got the questions still on the screen. You might want to send ASN your emails if they don't already have them. I know many of you would be members of the ASM. I'd like to thank all the panelists for taking part today. It's been fascinating. As I said, I've been in Belarus studies a long time. I always learn new things. And I really am happy to see the state of research in different places of the world. I mean, we're scattered around Germany, Sweden, Belarus, Canada in my case. At the end, there will be an edited recording will be available on virtual ASN site, and the videos of previous panels are also available. And this is only part of what ASN is doing for the entire academic year. Every 3 weeks on Thursdays at the same time, there will be a program. It will be posted about a week in advance on the ASN website. So go to that general ASN website or virtual ASN for updates. And also the call for papers for our favorite convention, the ASN convention, will go out next Monday. and the submission date will be mid-November, and the convention dates are 5 to 7th of May. So look out for that, and perhaps we can all meet again at that convention. So thank you again for coming today. We've run out of time, but thanks to everybody for taking part, and thanks to our audience for hanging around for an hour and 20 minutes on Zoom. And I know that is not difficult. We appreciate you being here. So thank you very much. Živa Belarus.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.